I would respectfully ask everyone to remain muted unless you're recognized to speak. During tonight's meeting, we're providing Communication Access Real-Time Translation, also known as CART. Anyone who would like to access this service should send an email to the RTD board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com, and a link will be provided. Additionally, the CART transcript can automatically be translated into Spanish for anyone who would like access to a live transcript for this meeting in Spanish. I will now call the roll. Treasurer Banker.
Present.
Director Busick is in excused absence. Director Catlin.
Here.
Director Chandler.
Present.
Director Geisinger.
Here.
Director Guchenritter.
Here.
I see Director Guchenritter on the line. Director Guzman.
I am here.
Director Harwick.
It's debatable.
Director Harwick is debatable to be here. Director Larson.
Here.
He is present as well. Secretary Nicholson.
I am here.
Secretary Nicholson is here. First Vice Chair O'Keefe.
Potentially?
Potentially here. We'll take it as a yes. Director Pagliari.
Present, and I'd like to note I switched seats with Guzman, Director Guzman.
Oh, excellent. Thank you for the note.
Yes.
Director Rusha. Director Rusha, I do not see present.
Just this time.
Do not see Director Rusha online. And Second Vice Chair Whitmore.
I'm here.
Okay, I have 13 present, 2 absent. We do have a quorum. Please note that the study session does not have a section for public comment this afternoon. However, the public can still offer comments by email or by participating in person or by participating remotely during next week's regular scheduled April 29th, 2025 board meeting. Tonight, we have one task at hand, which is to have a facilitated conversation regarding the process to set the GM CEO goals prior to the approval of the annual budget. I want to thank Directors Larson and Directors O'Keefe for their work to date to bring us all together for this important conversation. I also would like to recognize Directors Guzman and Guchenritter, who will be leading the charge on the Performance Committee over the next few months to ensure the process we agree upon is successfully implemented. Likewise, I want to thank GM CEO Johnson for her engagement and partnership in this process. And finally, thanks to all of you as directors for making the time to engage in this important board priority. As a reminder, this is part of one of our board goals for this year. Our facilitator this evening is Skip Spenceley from the Executive Forum. Skip is joined by Leah Almagno. Skip is going to guide our conversation tonight regarding the process to set short-term GM CEO goals. Skip brings many years of experience as a facilitator for similarly situated organizations, including DRCOG and various state departments of transportation. I'm grateful for Skip and Leah for joining us tonight. Directors, please look to Skip and Leah to run the conversation tonight. They will structure our discussions and call upon directors to speak. I know they have a few interactive elements as well. So, with that, Skip, the floor is now yours. I understand you may have some opening remarks, and I know too that we're expecting a quick presentation from GM CEO Johnson to help frame tonight's discussion. So Skip, excellent. I'll give it over to you, Ms. Johnson.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Skip, Leah, thank you for being with us this evening. As the chair indicated, he requested that I provide a quick presentation. We spoke this morning around 11:30 that could help ground us in our path forward relative to how the strategic plan comes into play. For you all's edification, I think where we're going is a good place in the sense that us working in tandem to set short-term goals. As we all know, it should be a bilateral process, not unilateral. So I look forward to the engagement. And more specific to the point at hand, I think understanding the short-term goals versus long-term goals, which I know I've spoken with some of you and we've had dialogue around that. And I believe that this presentation, which may be familiar to most of you sitting around this U-shaped dais, is something that we have referred to in the Performance Committee and other discussions which we have had thus far. I will go through it quickly just for a grounding exercise and then yield the floor to our facilitator. So for all intents and purposes, we know what we're here for today, and I've already said that in my opening comments, and see, we're already on slide 3. This is the performance assessment framework which the Board of Directors adopted in January 2024. The blue boxes basically incorporate the agency values, the core-based job function that were extrapolated from the job description that the board retained the services of Crothmeyer and Associates to do an active recruitment, and through the engagement of this board, develop that job description to which I was hired. Then we have short-term goals, and then the agency performance metrics that you have seen previously. And then it just showcases on the left and right side of the slide, the board accountability as well as the general manager and CEO's accountability, getting back to the phrase that I used before about the collective approach that we're taking here. I talked about this. This was derived from the strategic plan as it relates to values. I know there's been questions about why do we actually look at values. It's about how we show up, and I would equate this to being analogous to, well, at least when I was in elementary school, we used to have citizenship grades, right? If you were disruptive, what did that do for everybody else in class? So basically, it's like, can you be congenial, professional, possess the attributes needed to perform the job duties at hand? Speaking about the core job duties at hand, we've already talked about that. The short-term goals, that's what will be done in the period of time that has been identified. And then more specifically, the agency performance metrics that are embedded into this organization's strategic plan, upon which the board approved August 10th, 2021 in a special board meeting that is guiding the agency's direction. And so with that, this pyramid that you've all have seen more or less has the strategic priorities in the middle of the pyramid. I will go through now on the next slide showing the how, the why, the who, and the what, so we can clearly understand who's on first in all of this. And so as it relates to the why, it boils down to the board of directors, right? As it relates to the vision oversight, and then as we talk about where we are clearly defining the outcomes. Here also, it's the what. What are we actually doing? And so the board of directors, once again, providing that oversight and then monitoring progress about where the agency is going collectively. And that's critically important as we look at the discussion before us and how we align. And so then as we get to the how, recognizing that while I may be sitting in a certain seat, I can't do this job alone. And so as we talk about the strategic initiatives, that's more or less what are we doing in the short term, recognizing that we had a 5-year strategic plan, and looking at members of the team holistically, it's like, what are the tactics that we're leveraging to ensure that we are making progress on our short-term initiatives that are basically derived from the various inputs that we utilize, be it an employee engagement survey, community values survey, or customer satisfaction survey. We're basically taking the pulse on where we are and what we need to do. And short-term goals, i.e. strategic initiatives, allow us to pivot in order to make good on the long-term strategies that we've identified as our priorities. And the who, once again, the individual contributions of employees that comprise the Regional Transportation District. These are all embedded into their short-term goals during the course of their performance review periods. And so then this just showcases in a different viewpoint the strategic priorities which I spoke about. It's encapsulated in the agency performance scorecard, basically the metrics and things of the like, whether we're talking about OKRs or we're talking about KPIs. For all intents and purposes, this gives us a level of measurement of how we're performing as an agency. And then basically with the strategic initiatives, more on a short-term basis, looking at the annual scorecard so we can discern what we're doing and how we're showing up. And as a gentle reminder, the strategic priorities are community value, customer excellence, employee ownership, and financial success. I won't read the definitions to you. I know you're quite familiar, but wanted to ensure that these are more or less embedded relative to agency long-term goals, considering the nature of the period of our strategic plan. And I would be remiss if I didn't state at any time, this board could decide relative to where we are if we needed to quickly pivot and adopt a new strategic plan, considering all the factors that I just mentioned briefly in my previous remarks. And as it relates to the success outcomes, what was adopted back in 2021 is looking at community value, considering that this agency did not have baselines at the time in which we did this. We're talking about increasing the community value index for the community value survey, the success outcomes by 5%. That was indicated over the course of the plan, not on an annual basis. And the same for the other strategic priorities relative to the outcomes that are before you on the slide. And then the agency alignment, as you can clearly see, the vision, we know we want to be the trusted leader in mobility, delivering value and excellence to our customers and community. But a vision, simply put, is where we aspire to be at an organization. The mission, while we make lives better through connections, that more or less encapsulates what we do on a daily basis. The values, how we show up. We talked about strategic priorities, the strat initiatives. Then you have the department KPIs and individual employee contributions. And so each individual comprises the agency, but also they're a contributor, and this provides a continuous loop, and we actually use the plan, do, act, check model. And so the initiatives, just as a gentle reminder, as we focus on where we are back to basic, more specifically asset management, renewal, things of the like, considering that we are now an aging transportation network, 30 years, we need to ensure, 30 years in the rail business, that is, we need to ensure that we do have our assets in a state of good repair. We won't be able to deliver on our core business of making lives better through connections, through transit service delivery. And then people power, recognizing that any transit agency you look at, probably, at least in the United States and North America, I could qualify, 70% of one's budget is going to be geared toward labor because it's labor intensive the way we sit currently. And then a welcoming transit environment is critically important. And as we've honed in on our strategic initiatives being one's personal security and safety, that's important to employees because that leads into how we can retain individuals. And then more specifically, as we look at customer and community connections, that was derived through our last pulse check last year when we engaged with our community and customer survey, as well as with our employees. We want to enhance that customer experience. So I think all of these are intertwined. I know they're all intertwined. And so basically this talks about the back to basics. I'm not going to read through these. You guys know these as well. People power, as I talked about before, critically important that we're providing the tools and resources to ensure that we can retain the people power that we need for service delivery. The welcoming transit environment, you guys have heard about this ad nauseum. We've made great strides as it relates to reducing calls of service year over year from February of last year, a reduction in calls by 52%, increasing the presence, having sectors added, leveraging our Transit Watch app and other mechanisms that we can leverage going forward. Customer community connections, we have really honed in on how we're communicating at the Operations and Safety and Security Committee meeting being held on May 14th. We will provide information relative to real-time information. I know a couple of directors have inquired about that, and we made a commitment to share that information as well. And so that's it, and I will yield the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson. Skip, I'm leading over to you, and I just wanted to mention, because we are in a somewhat more formal setting, Skip, obviously, and Leah, you guys are going to be the ones who are going to be facilitating calling upon hands. So you guys do not need to look to me and ask to be recognized or not. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope I can bring this down a level of more informal in a workshop, is the way I think of this. So I don't have a script to read, but I do want to, first of all, apologize for the fact that Margie Malden, who is the president of Executive Forum, was supposed to be here with me today, and unfortunately she had a family commitment that she could not get out of, and she's in Alabama, where the weather's not quite as nice as it is here. In any case, she and I have worked together for a number of years on a lot of different agencies. We worked with Peggy at CDOT. We worked with about 4 or 5 other state transportation agencies, as well as local agencies as well. So we do have a little bit of knowledge, but I have to tell you, my 2-week orientation to where things are, I haven't been back at RTD for about 25 years. So things have changed a lot, and to try to get up to speed, and even listening to your presentation, Deborah, my head is still spinning just a little bit. So we're going to keep things simple, I hope. In a couple of minutes, I'm going to ask you to go around and to tell me your name. Of course, I can see what it is, but I want you to tell me what you think I should know about you. Okay? Now, it can be either what your passion is, it can be what you do in your spare time, it can be where you like to travel, but I'd like to know something about each of you. Is that all right? So I'm going to start just to give you an example. My background is as an engineer and a lawyer. I've spent most of my career working in the public sector, but my passion is really teaching. And I love to teach people about collaborative processes, about working together, about avoiding different kinds of conflict. The last 40 years, I've been an adjunct professor at the University of Denver, the last 10 years in the business school. Even though when they hired me, I didn't know anything about business, and I still don't, but for some reason they hired me. In any case, that's my 15 or 20 seconds of who I am and my background. So I'm going to come over here, Melanie, and even ask you to join this conversation. Can we?
Good afternoon. My name's Melanie Snyder. I'm the general counsel here at RTD. One thing to know about me is that I do love being a lawyer, but I also love doing that in the context of public service.
Thank you.
So Deborah Johnson, General Manager and Chief Executive Officer, and I pride myself on being a servant leader. I think public transportation is the great societal equalizer. While we weren't born on a level playing field, in order to take advantage of opportunities, first you have to access them. That's where we come in.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Michael.
Hey, y'all, I'm Michael. I represent District C. I love to drink coffee. Simple, hot brewed coffee. It's gotten me in trouble before with this body, but yeah, that's the way to my heart.
That's a simple one. Right?
Hi, I'm Brett. Something you should know about me. I was born in Colorado, and I take pride in our state and the future of where we're going.
I agree with you. I'm all there. Peggy?
Hi, I'm Peggy Catlin. I've known Skip Spensley for 40 years and I've known Margie Malden for 25. So that tells you how old I am. You were what?
Yeah, that's what she said. She was 10 years old when that happened.
That's right. I have a great passion for cooking, actually. I enjoy preparing meals for lots of people and entertaining. Thank you.
Kathleen?
My name is Kathleen Chandler and I represent District F, and I love Colorado. I'm a fourth generation native, grew up mostly in Southern Colorado. I love this state. I want to see this state succeed, and I love Arapahoe County where I live.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
I'm Lynn Geisinger. Like Peggy, I hadn't spoken to Skip Spensley for 30 years till the other day, but he had come to speak to my class when I was teaching at the law school. And I guess one thing about me, I came to this after many years in the bike industry and doing bike advocacy. So my passion is around all kinds of alternate transportation.
I want you to know, Lynn, we've taken, I think it's 28 bicycle vacations.
Nice.
Unfortunately, I didn't know you, or I would have been a better deal.
Yeah.
Chris?
Yeah, I'm Chris Nicholson. I represent District A in central Denver. And I think the thing to know about me, I'm a full-time transit rider, so I'm one of, I think, 2 board members that don't own a car and take public transit, take RTD pretty much every single day. And I'm also a public policy consultant and political consultant, so I look at everything through a political lens as
So
probably
we've
my
got some
first.
stories together to tell. huh?
Oh, yeah, a couple.
Troy?
Troy Whitmore, I represent District K, which was almost entirely Adams County, so that's my home. And I was probably smitten with the transportation system back while I was a young, and I'm not young anymore, but a young city council member in Thornton. And boy, has that city grown and the needs grown as well. And I'm recently retired, and my passion is playing really horrible golf, but I do it anyway.
Okay.
Julian Bouquet, District G. So I think most of you know that I'm a full-time teacher just coming from the classroom, and a lot of the time, if I seem a little stressed or tired, it's because I've been dealing with 12 to 14-year-old middle schoolers all day. Balancing that out and then chairing this board, it's a lot, but it's very rewarding. Active transit rider when I was going to college, went to the University of Denver, took the E and F line almost every day to get up there. And that was my experience with RTD. And that's what got me to this board. So grateful for it every day.
I am Patrick O'Keefe. I was elected last November. So I've spent 10 years since January on the board. And well, tonight hasn't gone through yet. And I'm a hockey player and a beekeeper. And I think I'm the only hockey playing beekeeper on the planet. So,
And it turns out we have a lot of mutual friends at CH2 Mill,
Yeah,
what used to
yeah.
be CH2 Mill.
learned everything from them. Yeah.
Aaron,
My name is Karen Benker. My passion is rescuing homeless dogs and cats. And so I am a board member of the Fort Morgan Humane Society, and we have a very big fundraising dinner coming up on Saturday, which we call Spaghetti and No Balls. And we're hoping to raise a lot of money for our homeless dogs.
that is very good.
We're available to be booked for parties in this.
8 snows a week.
We might have to strike some of this from the transcript, but Matt.
I'm Matt Larson. I represent District E. I've spent the last 20-some years of my career in the medical device industry. A lot of it I spent on the management team, often negotiating with our board on performance plans and budgets and just general plans to grow the business.
Thank you. Ian.
My name's Ian Harwick, and I feel like I could add on to a lot of, I share a lot of interests with my other board members, but the one that was not mentioned, sadly, is my absolute love of aerial trams, and that we should bring them into the metro area.
Aerial trams. Leah.
Hello, I'm Leah Almagno with Executive Forum. I'm a project manager here. Love taking on new projects and meeting former and past clients of Margie and Skip. It's always fun. Something interesting about me is I'm a dumpling seeker. I go on dumpling tours where I'll go to 6 restaurants in a day.
Dumpling tours, you said. Dumpling tours. Okay. That's good. It's a wide variety of interests here. I appreciate that.
Hey, Skip. So I'm remote. This is Chris Kitchenritter.
Oh, Chris, well, join us.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry I'm not there. Interesting thing about me, new dad, currently actually feeding my little girl. My background is in HR consulting, and then a passion of mine is travel, and when traveling, like to explore the public transit.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris. You know, when you started talking, I was thinking, where's this coming from? When I bought these hearing aids a couple of years ago, I didn't realize they'd connect to my phone, and I was walking down the street, and all of a sudden somebody started talking to me, and I couldn't figure out where it was coming from, and it was my hearing aid. So anyway, maybe some of you don't have those maladies, but all right. Well, let me just say by way of background, Margie and I have spent a lot of time the last 2 weeks kind of trying to get up to speed on things like the strategic plan. We also took a look at some of the what do I want to say? I'm forgetting here. The assessment framework, the annual survey results that have been done, try to get an idea of where things are. And I got to tell you, as I said before, my head is still spinning a little bit. We did have a chance to talk to some of you board members, and Deborah, of course, and some of her staff as well. So I think I've got at least a beginning of a grounding of why this is so important. Maybe I don't need to say this, but you guys turn your cell phones on. I have to say that to my class all the time. Make sure your cell phones are not ringing. Appreciate that. I want to start by telling you a story. Some of you may have heard of it. It's called The Trip to Abilene. You know it, Troy? Anybody else heard of it? Well, it's a great story. It's about a family who's in Coleman, Texas, 102 degrees. They're staying in a little motel, and they're on the porch and they're playing dominoes. And the father says, you know what, let's get in the car and drive to Abilene, and I found this cafeteria where we can have lunch. So they all sort of agree to it, and they get in the car and they endure this 53-mile trip to Abilene, and they eat in the cafeteria, less than the best food they'd ever had. And they drove back, and they get back to their motel, and the mother says, you know, that was the worst trip. I didn't want to go on that. Why did we do that? And the daughter says, yeah, me too, Mom. Why did we do that? And the son said the same thing. And finally, the dad said, well, I just thought it would be a good idea. I didn't really want to do it either, but nobody objected, or so we all went. So what's the lesson in this? What's the paradox in this story? Anybody tell me? Go ahead, Kathleen.
You need to speak up when you are feeling less than heard or less than in a situation. It's appropriate.
Absolutely. It's a kind of a problem with groupthink, if you will. Somebody suggests something, nobody says anything, all of a sudden it becomes a decision. It's described as the decisions that contradict individual interests or individual choices. And we do it because we're afraid. We don't want to embarrass somebody by saying they don't want to do it. They don't want to create a conflict in a situation. So in a sense, that story, I think, is applicable today because I want you all to participate. I want to make sure that everybody gets heard. If you have a contrary point of view, that's fine. We should hear it. We should get it on the table and have a chance to talk about it. And of course, the last thing of this is we want to focus on what our outcome is and what we hope to get from that. So you can see up there what the study session agenda looks like. We are going to start just, I got a few sort of introductory slides. We've already covered number one. See if I can work this. Okay, so again, and the chairman mentioned this, Julian, I got to be less formal here. This was what came out of the February retreat, and that is what we are focused on and hopes we can complete today. I want to start, this is my graph, a little bit different than what Deborah put up there, but it's kind of, in my mind, the same thing. Your board retreat focus was on short-term goals and budget, but there's a bigger picture here, and I think we all know that. It has to do with things like vision, mission, long-term goals, so forth. And one of the things that I was asked to take a look at by Jack when we were putting this together is to get an idea of what other large, medium-sized, small public transit companies do when they go through goal setting. And I don't know if you can read that. Is that readable by most of you? Maybe you guys can read that up here. But I'll just summarize it very quickly. All of them follow the same steps, if you will. They start with aligning vision and mission and strategy. If you will, that's that first crossbar, and all those little orange are the sort of the similar ones. Then the next one, if we look at the big company, is breaking down those goals into action objectives. And usually these end up, a lot of times they become long-term at this point, but then they're translated into short-term goals. And as you can see, you use the term as that in a large company, you use SMART goals. Those are specific. They are specific to the large-term goals. They're within that particular boundary. And then finally, a couple of them you see where we have stakeholders involved. And I know that's not formally part of this, but you all represent stakeholders when you come to the board. So that part of it is sort of covered. And then finally, you have where you get to beginning to track progression and make changes as necessary. And what I found interesting about that and looking at those, if you see the colors, they're all pretty much the same across there. Those steps are pretty common for any kind of goal setting process. So I wanted to start there and think about when we talk about goals, how we're going to do that. What I'd like to get a sense from you in terms of this process is what do you see as the essential pieces of that? And I want to mark these up here. It's up there on the board, but if you were to generalize those, how would you describe them? And I already did part of that for you, but let's just repeat those here. Michael? What's the first step in goal setting?
Can I ask a question real quick? Can you
Yeah.
get a copy of that? Because it's hard for
Um,
us to see it.
Actually, I did make a couple of copies,
Possibility.
but only made a couple, so
Okay, I mean,
let me
we
give
can
that.
share with our neighbor.
I've got
That's
two more. Who's got bad eyes like me?
You give me one, I can make.
Okay, good.
Sorry.
That's all
Where
right.
were we? I'm to identify what the first step in the goal setting
Yeah.
process.
When you start goal setting, where do you start?
I think for us, it's understanding our mission and values.
Okay. So that's that first thing, mission, vision, right?
Mhm.
And where does your mission or vision come from?
It comes from our strategic plan.
But before that, before you had a strategic plan,
This body, we decide
okay?
what's important for our respective constituencies.
Okay. How about anybody else? Thoughts about that?
I think it's from the state legislature where our mandate came from. Whoever set up this agency as a special district, our mission was described in
Right.
the actual legislation itself.
1973, right? When they passed the Organic Act that set up RTD, right? Was the first time the mission vision. Now you're right. I'm sorry, Troy, it was 69. It was 73 when they first hired, I think John Simpson was the first executive director at that time. Okay, so Organic Act is where that comes from. What's the next step? You can cheat and look.
Got all of our 15 districts, and many of us are the same, but many of us are not. So next step, I would think, would feed off of, oh, I'm sorry. Geez, Troy. Get my goodies. Since we have some similarities, but many demographic differences, there comes a point in time where we have to meet in the middle. So I would say maybe it's not step 2 or 3, but it's fairly soon that has to happen. That's collaboration, which then kind of helps with the prioritization.
And that's collaboration between who or among who?
Well, at first, I'd say it's agreement among us, 15. And
Okay.
certainly, staff has to jump into that process. as
And what are
early
you
as possible.
collaborating about? What are you collaborating about, Troy?
Well, we could be looking at our goals for ridership,
Okay,
and some districts, it's not as big a deal as it is to others, just because of the wild swings in population and need. I mean, Chris's district is much different than my suburban district and rural district.
so would you say sort of looking and collaborating and thinking about the long-term goals, which is one of the things that they establish up there? Would you buy that?
Yeah.
Chris, would you buy that?
Yeah, I mean, collaboration's obviously, on a 15-person board, you don't get anything done without some amount of collaboration. And yeah, I would agree. The next step, I mean, on the pyramid you were showing us earlier, is developing the long-term goals based on the mission that we've established in the strategic plan.
So do your constituents come up to you and say, this is the long-term goal I think RTD should have?
No.
No.
They're all
Okay.
short-term.
Okay, would you define them as long-term goals? Do they have metrics? So give me a long-term goal, Chris.
Long-term goal. Build more BRT. Operate more BRT, I guess for us would be.
Okay,
I'm going to jump in if you
Yeah.
don't mind. I think overall, an overarching goal is to provide mobility to the broader region. And how does this board best address
Okay,
mobility across this
Okay.
200 and some, 200 and
okay.
some square
Would you
mile
buy that,
region?
Chris?
But I guess, so the collaboration then is how do we best do
Thank
that?
you.
And what does that look like?
Okay.
Um,
So the goal, though, is as you first stated.
hmm.
Okay, does it have a metric?
It has several metrics, I think.
Or does the metric come at the next stage?
I think the metric comes at the next stage.
Okay. Kathleen, you said you thought there was a metric with a long-term goal.
Well, I think we need to decide not only the process, but potentially what is the overarching goal? Is
Yeah.
it to provide transit for
Yeah.
this district? And then I think maybe we should look to that far-reaching goal and then back up and start
Yeah.
planning. Because otherwise, we're gonna never know what target we're trying to get
Right.
to.
Right. So that's an opening to remind you all, we're not picking the goals today.
Right, right.
We're talking the process, but I got your
process.
point,
But
Kathleen.
the point is that we should at least all, depending on the 15 of us,
Yeah,
know what our specific district is expectations are, whether they're short-term or long-term expectations. That's for us to talk to our community about.
yeah.
But the point is that there is an expectation, and then from that expectation, we need to back up and figure out the process to get to that
Right.
expectation.
Which is part of what we're talking about tonight, right? The process.
Yes. Could I jump in just real quick, Skip? So again, and excellent points, Kathleen. I think the question got brought up is, you know, what is established right now as our long-term goals, our long-term process is the strategic priorities, which is going into
Oh, yeah.
2026. And as a reminder, community value, employee ownership, customer excellence, and then financial success are the four strategic priorities, which kind of we have now become synonymous with our long-term goals. But it is an appropriate conversation. Probably not tonight. It'd be hard for us to decide, but it is something to later on have the conversation. So again, based on those frameworks, and sorry if I'm overstepping, Skip, but based on those frameworks, that's where we live right now. You know, those are really our four parts of our box when it comes to setting our short-term goals, because that's what exists based on the timeline is from 2021 to 2026. We have the strategic priorities already established, as Ms. Johnson presented. And that's what our long-term goals are. But again, a future conversation is, you know, what is the future after that? So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Okay, so I heard you talk about short-term goals, right? Is that the next step? Next element?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And those we typically associate with what, the SMART goal, right? Which do have metrics,
Yes, sir.
timeline. They do have, you know, material parts of that, whatever.
Excuse me,
Can I jump in?
pardon the interruption. I had my hand up and I didn't know if
Oh,
I
I'm
would be
sorry,
able.
Joanne. Go ahead.
It's
For the state of
okay.
the record, Joanne Rusha has joined us.
Thanks. I didn't, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just didn't want to ask my question after we moved past that topic. I just wanted to kind of restate, and similar to what Director Chandler, I think, was getting at, like, when we have long-term goals, we obviously will have metrics and KPIs, but KPIs are not just very specific data subsets like a percentage. I mean, KPIs are also, when we talk about long-term goals or projects, they can be measured in stages. And I just wanted to put that out there. You know, to Director Nicholson, Secretary Nicholson's comment about establish more, BRT, there would be multiple stages in that process. Those are also KPIs when we talk about meeting long-term goals. We don't necessarily call them KPIs from an HR or goal setting perspective, but it's the same concept. The second thing I just wanted to note was a bit of a concern. Maybe this is for later, but our strategic plan that we had passed in 2020 had KPIs in them, as well as several SMART and longer term goals although smart doesn't necessarily mean it has to be very fast, it just means time bound. And there was a lot of specificity in that strategic plan. The revised version that's we're being presented with is much slimmed down and does not have those that similar language. Those strategies have been removed or they're more generic. So I just wanted to say, whether it's this conversation or another conversation, we don't lose sight of long-term planning. And while the current strategic plan might need an update, I don't think we need to completely reinvent the wheel in that regard. There was a lot of good material that we didn't follow through on, or the board just wasn't apprised of in terms of progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne, and I apologize. I got to remember that we got two people still. I think the other Chris is still. Chris, the other Chris, virtual, do you have any thoughts?
I mean, I guess just broad level thoughts. I mean, I think it's, you know, as we go back to as we think about that pyramid, my perspective on it is that it's the board setting the vision, the long-term goals, and then it's really the agency that is accountable, responsible for saying, here's how we're incrementally going to get there in the form of short-term goals. And if we don't, you know, as a board, I think it's fair to say, hey, we think you could be a little more aggressive or provide feedback. So I guess just to sum that up, I think of us as us, i.e. the board, long-term and vision, and then I think agency is responsible and accountable for the short term to get there.
Okay. Yeah, Lynn?
Yeah, I'm trying to think through what long-term goals should look like here. And, we talked about the 4 areas in the strategic plan: community value, customer excellence, all of those. Those are topics, but I don't think we have, as a board, have spent enough time talking about the long-term goals. We've gone straight to at least the last couple of years, and I think we've made progress in terms of getting to short-term goals, but I don't think we've really looked at, customer excellence. Yeah, it's a value, but what is the long-term goal there, and how do we define that? And I think that's something that should be part of this process.
Brent?
Yeah, I just want to add that on our list of essential parts of a process, I believe that the mission, vision, collaboration, long-term goals. I think before you get to short-term goals, you define how you measure and the metrics for your long-term goals. I think that you can't set short-term goals before you set the vision for how you're going to measure the long term. So an example, hypothetically, is if you set 30% transit mode share in the Denver region within RTD district as your long-term goal, that you would know that you succeeded your long-term goal when you've reached that. Maybe it's building a rail to Boulder. Maybe it's just bringing value into the community, but there has to be a measurable way so you know when you've reached your long-term goal.
Okay.
That's what I would add.
Chris? Chris. Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm a very informal guy, as everybody.
Got 2 Chris's here. I keep.
Yeah. We fight over which one gets the. I think it's also important to think about, what defines short-term and long-term. We are talking about a year-long goal as short-term and some amount of time, I guess the strategic plan length, as long-term potentially. But, in practice, there may be short-term goals that take 3 months or take 2 years. And, define it. In some ways, we're scoping our goals based on how long we're giving ourselves to complete them. We don't want to give a goal to GMCO Johnson that she's not going to be able to complete in 1 year, but it might be a really important goal, but it might not be so big as to fit into a long-term goal. So I think thinking about how we time bound our goals influences what we're going to decide the goals can be.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to come back to the question of what's long term? Is it 3 years? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? What would you say? Strategic plan's what, 5 years?
Yeah.
Is that, everybody comfortable with that as a
I think
long-term?
long-term for me would be more like decades. Like what does RTD look like in 2050? Midterm would be 5, 10 years, and short term would be anything probably under 3 years.
Okay.
Hmm.
So
Um,
that's,
Actually,
sorry,
Brett is, I
can
think
someone
I
just
agree with
allow,
Brett.
oh,
Sorry. I agree with Brett and I'm kind of modeling after what the governor's office has come up with for its 2035 plan. And I think we ought to have something that's, I mean, that is a decade, but I still think that it would be better to look a little longer than 5 years.
so do you think it's possible when the board and hopefully with the input of the management executive team, who are going to have a lot of the metrics that have been measured to help with that, we might come up with a graduated set of long-term goals? There might be a, maybe as you said, Brett, there might be a 20-year goal, there might be a 10-year goal, 5-year. I mean,
may I, I'm sorry, may I just, I know this is a more informal meeting, but just for the good of the order, can someone explain for those of us who are remote how we are supposed to chime in? We're used to raising our hands, but if we're popcorning, I don't want to interrupt anybody.
well, I think, Joanne, if you raise your hand, does it come up there on the screen?
Yeah, we can see it now.
Yeah, it will come up on the screen, Joanne, and I just got to keep my eye out for it. So thank you. Okay,
So
So-
do I just wait until I
go
don't,
ahead. Go ahead if you have a comment.
I did, yes, I have been. Again, I can't tell from the screen if other members are raising their hands or if we're just jumping in when you ask an open question. So I don't want to interrupt if other people are raising their hands or they're starting to speak. So if you could give me some instruction, I guess it sounds like I'll raise my hand and wait to be recognized, but thank
Yeah,
you.
Joanne, I hate to interrupt. So Skip will call on you and we'll advise him when your hand comes up. That'll be the best practice.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I was going to say I concur with what Director Guttmacher said about the pyramid and where the direction comes from. It comes from the board. I also, you know, when we talk about long, medium, short, it does get a bit subjective, which I think we are almost in agreement with. But ultimately, on this idea of SMART goals and our GM CEO and this like very short 1 or 10-month, time bound process, a SMART goal can be a component of a larger goal, whether that was mid or long term. It can also be a KPI, even if it's done within a shorter time period. I don't want to speak for Director Pegulari, but that might have been what he was getting at. Either way, that model has been well established both in public and private industry. And I think we should think, I think that would be a better direction for all of us and also be more fair to our general manager as it relates to her goal setting process. Thanks.
So if I could just mirror what you said, Joanne, you were saying that long-term goals would have or could have metrics of something similar to a SMART goal. Is that right?
Yes, there's actually nothing that says that long-term goals can't be smart. They should be
Yeah.
smart. It just might look different depending on the timeline.
Okay, thank you for that comment. Anybody want to respond to that? Anybody feel, does that make sense to you? Okay. So it could be a 10, a 5, and a 3. And I'm hoping we're not complicating the process here. But I do understand that there is that point of view in that. So when we go to short-term goals and we go to SMART, and we're usually talking on 1 year, next year, annual, right? But as somebody said, Brett, was it you that could be less than that? Or maybe it was Chris, I can't remember. One of you said it could be 3-month goal. Chris said that as well. Okay, good. Just to complete this then, once we have those things, what are the other 2 steps in that? What's it say, Ian?
little distracted by something else.
Oh, okay.
So.
You can't be distracted by something else. Matt?
After we've determined what the short-term
Yeah.
goals are? I mean, I think the process, the way it should work is that, after the board identifies what it thinks the short-term goals should be or what it aspires to, they should work with management to determine if those goals that they aspire to, what needs to change in order to achieve those goals, or to what degree those goals are maybe sort of not possible within the constraints that we have as an organization. And, but I think most importantly, within the sort of the range of options that we as a board have to decide what trade-offs we want to make in order to come as close as we can to achieving those goals, we as a board need to work with management to make decisions about which trade-offs to make.
Okay, so we could add collaborative in this point too then, short-term goals, a collaborative process.
Yeah, I mean, I think it absolutely has to be a collaborative process. I mean, we have to, as a board, have at least 8 votes to agree with it. And I think that if we're not working with management to understand the constraints that management has towards achieving those goals, then we're not doing our job.
Okay, good. Thank you, Matt. Other comments?
I think to Matt's point, a recognition of dual accountability in the sense that, if we're setting goals for management, we're also setting goals for ourselves realistically. And so it's not a question of, did the GMCO Johnson increase ridership by 20%? It's did the person we hired, did we increase ridership by that much? And so I think, in the way that we think about the goals that we're setting, in the way that we frame them to the people we're accountable to, the public, we have to recognize that these are just as much a reflection on all of us as they are a reflection on the person that we've hired.
Absolutely. That's a good point.
Director Ruscha has her hand up.
Okay. Who was it?
Joanne.
Joanne. I still didn't see her come up there, but Joanne, comment?
Thank you, sir. So I would say that when we have our discussions about short-term goals, they absolutely should be collaborative. And to that end, when they should also be, how do I say this? Whether it's coming from the agency or it's coming from the board or director or set of directors, they need to come with data, evidence, or some kind of case as to why we would make these items as a priority. Whether it's, proposing a goal or the agency even saying this is not a reasonable expectation, because that I think shows mutual respect, but it's going to contribute. We'll all have a better understanding of not just what we're doing in the shorter term, however we define that, but the longer term as well. And those constraints, they may be HR related, they may be financial, etc. I just know that, that communication piece is really important. And I'm glad we're having this conversation now, because as a director, I don't want to hear about constraints at the end of the year or right before something is due relating to goals before a contract deadline at the last minute. I want that to be an ongoing conversation. So I think that Director Larson was on point, and I would just emphasize that this has to be a continuous process. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Joanne. Yes, go ahead, Karen.
I wanted to emphasize what Chris had said about setting goals. It's not just for our general manager. I would like to be able to have a good, strong exercise talking about, as an RTD board, top management, drivers, mechanics. We set some goals for all of us.
Yeah.
and not just one person.
Yeah.
We set goals for ourselves. And I'm hoping, and perhaps they're different, slightly different. Perhaps some are more short-term goals for our general manager, and we have some longer-term goals that might last a year or two. But then, of course, we have to keep it measured. We have to keep track of them. And we need to be able to report on them to see where we are. So make sure that we stay on track, because it's very easy to get off track.
Well, thank you, Karen. I'm feeling a lot of consensus in the room. You gonna give me less than that, Michael? Go ahead. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
I want a clear understanding on some of what was just said. Long-term goals belong to the board with the mission and the vision, right? Cool. Midterm goals, somewhere in between management and the board. Short-term goals, we own after we approve, but that approval process should come through negotiation with the general manager, CEO, agnostic of the individual in the role. The
You're talking about
process,
short-term goal.
the process to get to the short-term
Okay.
goal is not
Yeah.
me giving a performance improvement plan
Right,
to an employee.
right.
The short-term goal is an agreement that they are bringing forward what is the most important aspects of what they see, and us working with them to negotiate what a short-term outcome could look like in the time frame that we have established for that goal-setting period.
Okay.
So I am struggling so hard to bite my tongue every time I hear, we set the goals for. No, that is the wrong approach. We set the goals with.
Together.
We can influence, as Director Larson alluded to earlier, but the idea that we are pointing a finger at and saying, you will do this, that's a different type of conversation, which I don't believe we have had in my time on the board. We came really close this year, but we were
Right.
all reminded that when we approved the goals, we own the goals at that point. Short-term, long-term, midterm does not matter. We own the goals along with the individual who is fulfilling the role of the general manager, CEO. And while we are the employer of that position, there's a difference between leading and being bossy. And I want to be really careful and very clear about that. We could absolutely be bossy. It's possible. It may not be the right tack in every situation. And when it comes to that, the general manager CEO position is not the only position that we should be reviewing and setting goals with the individual fulfilling that role. We're here for this purpose right now, but we also have one other employee that we often neglect in making sure that that work gets done. So without getting too convoluted in it, I would caution my fellow directors to consider the ramifications of their words when they say we set for and we work with on something, because this is a collaborative process, which there was agreement on, but language matters.
Yep. Thank you. Good point, Michael.
I agree, because I also think I don't know everything. And my expectation is that hopefully the GMC knows a lot more than I do. And so we need that collaborative effort, because I don't have the time, the energy, and no one hired me to do that. So I cannot plan everything. I have to be a little bit bigger picture and allow whoever that is to do their job.
Yeah.
That we help framework, but we are definitely not into the minutia, because otherwise this transit agency will never go anywhere, because there's too many of us putting too much input in, right? So there has to be an accountability, but there also has to be a person who will make those decisions based on their expertise and knowledge that I certainly don't have.
I want to come back to that in a minute, Kathleen, but I want to hear what Chris has to say. Thank you for that comment.
So I disagree with Michael, but I want to let Joyanne go first because she had her hand up
Oh,
before I
okay.
tried to raise mine.
Thank you, Secretary Nicholson. There is no she waiting with her hand up, but I appreciate it. So the I actually wanted to lean into what Director Guzman was saying about the collaborative effort and good faith effort. I do concur. In organizations I've been asked to set my, goals for the year, and I would set them, and then they would be approved, or there would be a conversation with the CEO or the VP. But when I did that, though, there was absolutely no question in my mind of what my job was, or what my expectations were, or where we were going as an organization. I mean, that's in part how I, you know, got the role of the job that I did. I had a good understanding of where we were moving as a body. So I would that's where I go back to the strategic plan. And even if it shouldn't be broad, there should be some specifics in there, even if we can't achieve them in a year. But I do think there is a collaborative process and a joint ownership. I also just wanted to state that it's my opinion moving forward as we do this, that when we are doing goals, long, medium, short, however we're defining them, that it is not just one or two directors that are leading, and traditionally this has been the chair. It's not to disparage anybody in the room. This is how RTD has done it for 20 plus years, but that we do this more as a board, as a collective body, so that we don't have a situation that transpired earlier this year. So I'll stop there, and thank you, Secretary Nicholson, for letting me go ahead of you.
Thank you, Joanne. Chris?
Thank you, and my apologies, Director Rusha, for getting your pronouns wrong. From a pure mechanics perspective, the short-term goals are not a negotiation the way the contract is. We vote on them, we set them. There is no formal negotiation. It is our responsibility. And I think that while I point out that while there is absolutely consultation and there's absolutely dialogue, and we absolutely should listen, in every job I've ever worked, my boss set my goals for me after having long, honest, forthright, one-on-one conversations with me, with the CEO, with the VPs. That was the process. And I say that not to minimize the need for collaboration, not to minimize the need to listen to the person that we have hired as a board, but because we are the ones responsible for the agency. We are the ones at the end of the day that the taxpayers hold accountable, not the GM CEO. And we need to be the ones 100% responsible for those big choices, and not foist onto the GM CEO and say, well, we set bad goals because we had to compromise. We set bad goals. We made bad decisions. It's on us. And so I'm just going to emphasize again and again, it is our responsibility to do these things well. It is our choices that matter, and we need to take very public ownership when we make good choices and we succeed, and yay, we did everything right, or no, we set bad goals and we didn't get something done and everything blew up and we screwed up. And so that's why I say it's on us and not a question of a partnership.
Chris, I don't hear that much difference. As in all due respect, I would say it's a distinction without a difference. The board does approve the short-term goals. You are the final body to do that. But everything's a negotiation. Everything you enter into is a negotiation. When you get more information, you make adjustments. And so that collaborative process maybe is not a formal negotiation in the sense of what you may be referring to it, but clearly I don't hear that different than what Michael is saying, because I think you both take responsibility for it. She takes responsibility, as the general manager takes responsibility, but also the board for setting them. So it's joint.
Yeah, it's a difference between it's a difference between a formal negotiation
Yeah,
and a.
right.
Yeah.
Agreed. Lynn?
Yeah, and I think this has been a process that we've been trying a few things, and two things I'm hearing. I don't think, I'm glad we're having this conversation. I'm glad the people who brought this forward have done that, because I don't think we've had the conversations around our long-term goals that we need to have. I agree with Brad. I think he said what I said earlier better than I did, which is that that's a conversation we need to have. We need to talk about, do we need more specifics than where we are? I know that the staff has come up with strategic initiatives. That's a start that direction, but I think we need to have it. And I also think that because of the timing this last year and this year, partially because of that and partially other things, we did not do a good job of collaborating before putting together our short-term goals. So I'm hopeful that out of this process, we'll be able to focus on those.
Well, I think, thank you, Lynn, for those comments. A little question in my mind that we're having this discussion because things haven't gone the way we'd like them to go. You know, I mean, we only want to look in the rearview mirror so long, and then we want to be looking ahead and saying, what do we do? It's going to be tough to catch up in 25 for 26. Okay, well, we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about timing and give you all a shot at that. But I think what we really want, something that is going to endure for more than just the next year. And that was the idea. Julian?
And just real quick, I think the whole idea of this conversation as well is that, you know, first name basis, Deborah has gone through the process. This is the 5th time that she's gone through the process. And we need to establish as a board, what does that process actually look like? And I think that's the whole idea of this conversation. What does it come down to being appropriate? Everyone's brought up, you and Kathleen have brought up excellent points of looking at the long-term goals itself. Again, conversation for a later date, but I think that's what we hope to walk away is that we all have a common understanding of not only of what we want that process to look like, not for only 26, but years ahead. So that's really the hope of this meeting today. I do see Director Guchenritter's hand online.
Thank you. I guess this isn't really a question. It's more of just sharing a thought. But, you know, when I think about the long-term goals and the vision, which really, you know, we all agree should come from the board, should be defined by the board. There's no incentive like there is an incentive for the short-term goals. And I guess that's a financial incentive. And so I think maybe sometimes that's why we get hyper focused on the short-term goals. It's like, well, that's where we can more influence and have impact. And then just the other thought I'll share is, and I may be naive here, but the reason I'm not hyper focused on short-term is because how much can we really move the needle in 1 year for an entire agency? And maybe, again, maybe I'm naive in that. And the answer is, Chris, we can move it a ton. But that's why I again, go back to the long-term goals. To me is really what's most critical in the vision. And then it's step by step, the agency, the people that know better than we do, pretty much all the time, of, okay, how do we incrementally move those steps to get to the long term? So just wanted to share that. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Again, I think there's pretty much agreement on what he said. I don't see anybody moving their faces. Matt?
I mean, all right, I guess, I mean, I don't know how much we can move things on in a year, but I mean, the long-term goals are ultimately composed of, you know, multiple years of achieving or not achieving short-term goals. And I think it is our role to identify what the goals are, much like we did with the strategic plan. One of the goals is community value, so on and so forth. That is our job, and then it's also our job to translate those longer term goals into short term goals for each year. And I think a negotiation with management is a good way to describe it, but it's not something that we, would normally want to just kind of throw down from on high to our managers. That's not a good way to have success. But I do think ultimately we are the agency. We are the ones who have been empowered by the public to decide everything about the agency, and it's our responsibility to do that, and that means holding anybody who we delegate our powers to responsible for achieving the goals that we devise.
If I'm
Excuse me, Joanne?
sorry, I have conflicting feedback on whether or not if you can see my hand. I just wanted to say that I think both Director Gutschenritter and he just put his hand down. Okay. And Director Larson are correct. It's a matter of how we're framing this, but you can't meet your long or medium term goals, whatever they are, without some short term goals. 4 months on, I do feel almost agnostic about the ones we passed in January, because I know they tie into a bigger picture. It's the bigger picture that I don't have a full picture of. I can only make my best guess based on what the agency shares. And I would also just offer that it would be helpful if the agency shared with us what their departmental plans and goals are, because I know each department and each department head manages those. But if the board is not apprised, then how can we really be involved in this process on a micro or a macro, or even when it comes to an evaluation? I don't want to get too off I don't want to get off topic. So, Mr. Chair, call me back in if I'm going off topic, but I'm thinking back to the review process of our general manager, and it was largely in part on those short-term goals, but also there were a lot of other questions that related to her departments. And I had a hard time answering them unless I knew for sure, that something had been accomplished. So I would just say that the agency, I think it benefits everybody if the agency also shares what goals, what plans that they have for the departments that they're overseeing, particularly ones that come before our respective committees, because we only know what we know. Thanks.
I want to go back just for a moment to your comments, Matt, because again, I don't find them different than others. And maybe that's my problem. You can help me understand, because I didn't hear that was a dissent from anything in terms of a collaborative approach.
Yeah, I don't think they were really that, different in a major way from what most people have been saying. I mean, I guess what I would like to kind of add is one of the more important things that I think we need to do in this group is decide what we're measuring, like what the specific measurements are that matter to us when we're setting goals. I think that unlike kind of the private sector where there's pretty standard measurements for a company that a handful that you might look at to see if it's successful, we have not, it doesn't seem as a board, decided on those measurements consistently over the years. And I think it'll be really important for us to nail down exactly what we think those metrics should be as they relate to the goals that we are trying to achieve.
Good point. I think there would be agreement. Chris?
So I think one other piece with regard to the measurement issue is, one reason why I think we end up with goals like ridership and on-time percentage and things that are they're baked in every year to what we do. Hiring was, I think, one of the ones last year, is something that you can always measure every time. It's the same thing every year. As opposed to, for example, if we had a long-term goal of finish fast tracks, and it was literally finish out the N line, the L line, I forget what the Southwest lines are. But the point being, if that was, I'm sorry, I don't ride light rail that often. Thank you. Sorry, C and D. I should remember the C. Point being, if that was the long-term goal, then an obvious short-term goal becomes something like finish all the planning for the end line and get a cost estimate and whatever. And that's your year one goal. And then year two becomes, and so, but because, and I'm just saying this, I don't think we have any concrete long-term goals as by 2030, we're going to finish all the fast tracks, or we're going to do the fleet transition plan. We have a fleet transition plan, but it's not like this is going to get done by 2032. And then you back that into, okay, this, so it's like without a concrete long-term goal that requires 10 steps, we are not going to have a short-term goal that gets you to that thing. So I think that's one of the challenges and why we end up having ridership and stuff like that, that is just baked into daily operations instead of something like transition all the vehicles to green energy or whatever.
Point well taken. And I think we're walking kind of a fine line here between process and then getting into the weeds of how do we define a long-term goal, although some of these things will be helpful in the discussion.
Yeah.
But I would like to go back just for a moment and get your thoughts about, I can't spell collaboration, but other than that, what does it mean that we have collaboration? What does that mean to you? Give me some thoughts about that. Yeah, Brett?
I think collaboration is unique given that we're a publicly elected body. But I see it as multi-directional collaboration with goal setting. Since we're elected, we have an agreement with the people who elect us to collaborate with their vision and goals and desires. And ultimately, I think that's the most important piece, but we also have collaboration with staff and what's possible. And we also have collaboration with each other and what we all want to achieve. And theoretically, we all are perfect representations of our district and what we want, but there's also making sure we listen to the groups in our district. So not
So
to
if I
give you a
said-
long-winded answer.
Relating it to constituents' desires, what they want.
I personally rate that as number one.
Okay, all right. What else? Somebody says they want to collaborate, what does that mean? Peggy?
Well, I think to add on to what Brett said, and I do agree, if we go back to my original premise that we want to be, provide mobility for the region, there are other players that also do provide mobility. There's the City and County of Denver, the counties, they're the other bodies. There's CDOT. They have long-term visions and plans. And to the extent that we can collaborate with them to help them achieve their goals, and we in turn can achieve ours. So I might cite as an example, we could have a goal of a modal shift to transit over the next 20 years of X%. And what do we do to provide that in the region?
Can I quickly add that I think to summarize, like we have a lot of government collaborators, whether that's our bosses in the state legislature who created the district, the people who elected us, or the other adjacent agencies that we're basically peer to, like CDOT, and then all those municipalities underneath us, or within us, not underneath us.
I feel like the professor who always asks a question and knows what he wants the answer to be and he doesn't get it yet.
May I?
Thank you. Yes.
Sorry, it's difficult to hear. It's difficult to hear you, sir. Collaboration literally requires us working together by definition. I mean, that implies joint ownership, but that is a joint process. But collaboration requires people to listen. And I don't know if, oof, is that getting written up? Is that getting written down?
Yes,
Listening.
yes.
Okay. It's something that is important. Yes, we listen to our constituents and constituent groups, and we should also be listening to each other as directors. It doesn't mean we always agree, but it requires listening in all directions. Whether we're speaking with management or management is speaking with us, we have to be able to listen.
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Good point. Does it mean sharing information?
Yes.
That was the answer I was looking for. Pretty soon you just have to share. So it's sharing information. And we've heard a couple of times that, I'm sorry that I can't write very well with this thing on the, but sharing information means that it has to come from both sides. It has to come from the constituents side, from the board's constituents, has to come from the executive management side. And so I won't go back to the word negotiation, Chris, but it is finding the balance in those things, right? Is that what collaboration is? Okay. Anything else? What else?
Go with collaboration. It's a collaboration. I like that.
So Skip,
Yeah.
collaboration is the fluffy word.
That's why I'm asking for definition.
So you hope after a decent collaboration process that we find consensus. And that's not always easy. So we have to have a mechanism to get to that. And hopefully it's not an 8-7 vote.
I like that. I happen to believe that consensus is the best way to make decisions. You don't have winners and losers. Okay, and people tend, even if you give them the opportunity to have a different point of view, and if they don't have that different point of view, you acknowledge it and you move on and ask somebody whether they can live with it. Right? That's consensus. Thank you.
I
Thank
also
you.
think collaboration is the art of compromise, right? You need to take a step towards somebody and somebody needs to take a step towards you so that you end up with the best decision for the most people.
Okay, I like it.
So, it's that art of compromise so that no one feels like they are the loser and no one feels like they are completely the winner
Right.
either. It has to be that balance, I think, is more appropriate because it is the best for the most.
Yeah, absolutely. I do a lot of mediation work these days, and my 50% of the mediations I do are barking dog mediations. And either the dog barks or it doesn't, right? So where's the middle ground, okay? So, that's kind of where we are in that process, is finding what I would call balance, Kathleen, but it is the art of compromise, absolutely. Anything else we want to add to this? Because I think this really helps get the fluff away, Troy. Yeah.
So Director Tisdale was really good at this, and it's just the C words, so we've added 2 more. We're gonna call it 5 Cs now, but there were 3. Communicate, which is listening and speaking, to understand. Cooperate, which is to lead together in the same direction, and then collaborate, which is to work on things together. And without those 3 things happening, none of it happens. But that's also the challenge for the elected board of RTD, as we are a 2-way advocacy role, right?
Well, if I-
So when it comes to the goal setting, yes, it is important for us to listen to constituents, but we've discussed the idea of being here as both delegates with authority elected and also as trustees, being entrusted by our communities to make the right decision. And if we can't have the proper communication to reach consensus, if we are not purposefully working towards the long-term goals, then there's no way we can collaborate on writing those goals out. And each of those words has a very specific definition, but those 3 things lead to the consensus through compromise and understanding what's important to each sub-district represented by one of the 15 board members. That still is exclusive to the elected board and does not take into consideration the piece that is the internal advocacy role we have, which is our cooperation, communication, and collaboration with the agency staff, specifically the general manager, CEO in this case, for this purpose. But that's overall. We know people power is how we do things, and we need to deal with that. So we need to take the advice of our subject matter experts into consideration while we are having the wrestling match among the 15 board members to figure out where we'll come out with the priorities. But it still is not, and I'm gonna say it again, it's not the legal negotiation, it is a
Right.
communicative negotiation between what is possible from a financial, from a people, from an individual to create the goal. And I would add this one piece in. We're all super passionate about why we're here. There is no doubt about that. But our staff is too. And so if we're just setting random goals without taking into consideration any input or feedback from them, we lose their passion because this becomes a checkbox list of things to do, and that's boring in any job. And the passion comes out, that's where the work begins, and that's where the work accelerates, and we see the rock star ability and the superstar ability of the team that we have garnered and gathered under our general manager CEO currently, but they have to be given some room to breathe. Oxygen has to be given to a fire for it to grow. And if we suck the oxygen out of the room by making this process a one-way process, we lose that ability. So again, iterative process, going back and forth, working together is what will make this a successful situation.
I want to piggyback on what you said about compromise and collaboration, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think one big part of that is knowing what you care about personally. So for example, for me, you know, I've done a lot of thinking in advance of this process. And, you know, I don't care what the goals are. I care that they are ambitious. Some people are going to care that we have a goal is about people power, or it's about on-time percentage, or it's about this other thing. I am comfortable going in whatever direction the board wants to, but whatever direction we go in, I want it to be something where I can go to my constituents and say, this is ambitious. We're pushing for best in class. We're not settling for, you know, what we can do just by, you know, waking up in the morning. And so I think for each of us, understanding what is it you actually want to fight for, what is it in advance you really care about, and what is it you're willing to just be like, all right, that's fine, I can live with that. You know, before the negotiation gets heated, that to me gives us this, at least gives me the self-awareness around what do I actually want to see us get out of this? And I'm willing to be very open about what that is for me in advance.
I think that's good. Joanne?
Thank you. I don't know if this is part of our conversation tonight, but I just wanted to point out that traditionally we have had 3 goals for the GM CEO in terms of short-term goals. And there might have been 20 put forth, and then it becomes a rat race to figure out what 3 goals we're going to end up with. No organization only has 3 goals, and most CEOs don't only have 3 goals. And I just want to emphasize again, like, we need to see departmental plans and their goals. We can't get a big picture if that picture is not being shared. So in a more concrete, like, to make this concrete, because I think we're talking very abstract tonight, like, we have corrective action plans that are outstanding with the PUC. Some of them have been open in excess of 3 years. Some of them are, you know, are also part of our budgeting process. Whether or not our general manager, it could be any general manager, whether or not their performance incentive, you know, is tied into that, I still want to know those metrics. So, you know, previously, I just wanted to note we've had GMs where they had goals that were not tied into a contract or a financial incentive, but they were still very clear. So I don't know if we've already passed that point or if it's another conversation, but I would like to do away with the idea that we only settle on 3 or 4 very big things. That's not how transit agencies work. That's not how large organizations work. And I think that just keeps us in the cycle we're in right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joanne. We did say in emphasizing we're not setting goals tonight, and there definitely will be a discussion about how many goals get set when we get into that process. I want to do something now. I want you all to take a break, but before that, as you notice, we've got a timeline up here that's empty that says short-term goal setting process. And so what I'm going to have you do is to pair up with a person beside you. And you guys are going to pick a couple of those that you want to put a time on. And so you're going to have to write on this sticky, for example, review, vision, and mission, and then stick it up there along where you think it belongs. Okay? So we'll see how this works. And I'll have you take a break at the same time so that, let's see, you're over here.
Is that this year or just any year?
This is we're looking forward. So it's going to be tough for this year. So let's think of it for 26. Okay. Chris, you and Lynn together, right? Kathleen, you and Peggy.
Come over to you.
And then Michael, you guys. So why don't we take 10 minutes? You guys can be talking in that time.
For those of us, for the two of us are remote, do we talk to each other or do we just sit out this activity?
I think, Joanne, it's going to be tough. Maybe you could be part of the conversation when we start getting can we get a picture of this? Is she able to see that? Okay. Okay, then when we get the stickies up there, Joanne, we'll give you a chance to comment.
Well,
Is that all
I
right?
don't need to comment. I'm just asking if there's a way for Director Gutschmidt and I to participate in this activity.
what?
We could certainly speak to each other in the,
Yeah, yeah. My,
Do you want us to put sticky notes up for every single one of them?
yeah. Well, no, I want you to pick a couple that you think are important and do those. And we'll see whether we get them all covered. So pick two up there that you want to add.
At least for another 3 months.
Nice to sit down. My leg hurts. By the way, if there's something missing up there in a step, you can add that too.
Hey, Joanne, can you hear me?
yes,
And-
sir.
And Chris, so in the email that was sent to everyone, it does have the graphic included in the presentation. Last slide.
Thank you, sir. I have those up. I guess I mean, it sounds like we're, I'm gonna use a teacher phrase, think, pair, share here. And I just wanted to know if there was a way that Director Gutschmidt and I could participate. I mean, we do have the capability to speak to each other as you guys are doing
Yeah,
your
I
thing.
think for
But we
practical
can
matters,
out. We'll sit it
my
out.
teacher brain is going, hey, we're kind of in this 10-minute break right now. And I think it would be best for you and Chris, once we start talking as a full group, to share kind of your initial thoughts after studying that graphic, just for, best practice, I would say, so.
Sure. So that's fine. We can sit this one out, but and I do have the graphic in front of me. I just didn't understand that it sounded like people were offering their thoughts or amendments and we can't see that, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We're not gonna be able to see it unless the
To
screen,
give you a
unless
little
it gets
real
panned.
life, you see me swinging back and forth, hopefully in the boardroom in the middle of the room. And then most people right now are just chatting with one another a little bit informally. Some folks are enjoying some food. I think what would be best is, again, looking at that graphic on the last page of the slide and designating where you believe would be appropriate um, to put some of these goal setting elements on the actual timeline itself. But my recommendation, again, unfortunately, um, my best offer would be enjoy this time right now, look at the graphic itself and have some ideas of where you guys would be putting some of these goal setting elements.
No, I appreciate that. And I don't want to just take up your break. I should be more clear. I have the graphic in front of me. When it comes to viewing the boardroom, I can see your back right now. And when we reconvene, there you are. Hi, sir. Okay, nice jacket. So
Thank you.
what I'm saying is when we reconvene, it sounded like there was some sort of like physical hands-on activity and I didn't, or is it going to be on the screen? Maybe I should have just clarified. Where am I to look so that I understand what my fellow directors have contributed since?
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Like
absolutely. Absolutely. So my recommendation would be, it would be the screen that you're looking at yourself with the graphic. And then what they're doing right now, just to the right of me, the directors are putting on sticky notes in
Right.
regards to what they believe are going to be the, again, best set timeline. And I think for you guys online, I think it's going to be beneficial because I think Skip's going to say it audibly for you guys to say and kind of summarize where people put the sticky notes.
Okay. Oh, thanks. It looks like we've panned to the sticky notes. It's a little bit small, but also the board office could, it'd be also be appropriate for them to just like take a snapshot of that and just email or text it to us as well. But
Absolutely.
I was trying to figure out
Ooh,
how do we
okay, so yeah, this
participate
is going to be, so I'm
remote.
looking at the screen too. This is going to be where Skip is going to be speaking. And it looks like our lovely tech folks have what's been written down. And in all transparency too, Joanne, from my seat, it's going to be hard to read, but Skip's going to do an excellent job of reading off what's been put on these stickies, okay?
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
Cool.
so now I can see other directors
Perfect.
in gallery view as the main speaker, so that if we could do that when we return, that might help us. And thanks for explaining.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut into your break.
No, you're
But,
good. I appreciate your patience.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go grab a snack and I'll see y'all in a few minutes. Although I do have the graphic in front of me.
Okay, folks. So in respect of time, we are scheduled for 6 o'clock. So I'm going to have us take a seat. If there is interest, we can extend a little bit to 6:30. So if we could all come back to our seats, that would be excellent.
Patrick, I only see one of your colors up there. You guys only had one you wanted to add? I wanted 3 or 4 from you.
All right.
Simplicity is the new sophistication, right?
Well, welcome back, everyone, and welcome back those who are virtually assembled, who are listening to our special study session, who will listen to this on the YouTube recording later on. And hopefully, Joyanne and Chris, you have come back to join us. I appreciate you guys and your patience. And I'm going to give this back to Skip whenever he's ready.
Thank you, Julian. So we got 3 all here long-term goals being set probably in the January timeframe. Does anybody have any problems with that? Yeah. Right?
I agree with that, but it was very difficult because around every 2 years we have an election, and that also can muddle things up. So I just wanted to make people aware of that. It's not, I think I would also point out, I think we talked about that, like, long-term goals are probably something that isn't set every year. They're reviewed and they're adjusted, but there should be a process determined on when you actually set the long-term goal, and probably not change it every year.
Yeah.
Skip, in fairness, I mean, I agree with Brett. We put our post up there. It's just a review, like, where are you on your long-term goals in
Right.
achieving them, not resetting them,
Right.
at least from our
It
perspective.
could be new, a review could end up in being new long-term goals, but that's the point. Has to happen early in the process. Next timeline, it says, in this, the performance committee reviews short-term goals. Now, this is yours?
This is ours. So
Tell me about that, Michael.
process for the performance committee to get something ready to go before the board. If the goal is to try and make something sustainable and a repeatable process, if the end date is to really try and have a discussion and board agreement between the general manager, CEO, and the board of directors around the budget beginning time, so they can discuss assumptions and new initiatives to create a budget that comes to the board later, we need to work backwards. The backwards work would be that budgeting work is June, July. The month before, we should have goals pretty close to finalized in a public meeting. The month before that could be an executive session or a public meeting where we're still working with the general manager to get to a finalized point. So that would be a second meeting, and the first meeting would have to be at least 3 months before. In the way that our meetings work, we usually have a discussion. With these, we would probably need a second discussion, and then we would recommend an action to the full board. That would happen at the same time that they're bringing up new things for the budget. So it's not a quick process, but working backwards, we would probably need to have at least 3 meetings prior to this going to the full board. And we work in committee to get the work done, but every director is available to join those meetings. So it's not like it's done in a silo. But what we would want to have is public review of the goal setting process prior to it going to the full board for the first time. And so we need to talk about that layout and what's required there.
Nobody put a sticker up for this. When does this happen? Executive staff identifies short-term goals.
I would say it doesn't. I don't think that it's the job of the executive staff to identify the short-term goals. I think it's the job of the performance committee.
Well, if I could jump in my defense, I did mention that it would be really nice if we did have executive staff's own plans, since every department has a plan in the agency for their goals. and their projects. So maybe there's a blend. I also just wanted to, but I did want to touch on what Director Guzman had said about the public review process. I think that is really key. And just because I do still feel like short-term goals are cart before the horse, but if this is, I understand why we're having this conversation. I do I wanted to point out that, you know, previously, like years ago, when the board had conversations like this, they were also public meetings. So that's good that this is a public meeting. And we had joint strategic planning. So I think that's something that we need to return to. And then as we have ongoing discussions from large to, you know, I don't want to say small, they're still impactful. Shorter term, that we continue to have these conversations in public as much as possible, because that also ensures that all directors are apprised of what might be transpiring. Even before we had a rollover of almost half of our board, the majority of the board was not necessarily fully apprised of what we might be voting on in January. And so I think this is a good first step, but we should continue this model. Thanks.
I want to highlight actually something that Lynn pointed out that I think is really on point here. And that is that this is all meant to piggyback on the budget process. The whole idea here is we are doing something that informs the budget process. You know, we're setting the short-term goals. Those short-term goals inform the budget priorities, inform the budget, and that creates the budget. The needs of staff, the needs of Deborah, the needs of the CFO, all of those people are in many ways what should inform the calendar for us. You know, I don't know when they do X and when they need Y. I know what input I want to provide. I know that we want to have short-term goals for them, and we want to do this, long-term goals, and these pieces. But, you know, I think we need to know from staff, where do those slot in? When do they need to hear from us for it to be effective and useful?
This word is identify, not set. Good point. And I think that was, though, the point you're making, Chris, is that would it be helpful to the board to have input in a collaborative process? And I was going to ask earlier, I said, who should do what first? Well, if it's collaborative, it shouldn't make any difference, right?
No, because we're too big to do everything. We need committees.
You want to be on your mic there.
Sorry. We need, I mean, yes, want to be collaborative, but the committees exist for a reason so that we all don't have to think about everything all at the same time, and that we have a process that can, you know, get representative recommendations. That's all I was going to say.
And I agree with that as well, because I think what happens with this is I don't know when a bus fleet needs to be replaced. That is up to the executive staff to identify that goal. It impacts the budgetary process, right? But so we need that input because I don't know those things. And so I think it's not only collaborative, but it's absolutely necessary, because otherwise, what's the point of having a budget? Because she's going to come back and say, well, we can't do that because this has to be done. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. This must be replaced this year. And if it's not on that list, then what do we do? Right? So I think that's part of it.
Well, and I think the intent, and again, I will take responsibility for trying to identify these in a way in which the thought was having executive staff, because of the work they're doing with their surveys and their departmental plans, as Joanne keeps mentioning, and other things, to have them come and say, here are some areas where we think, you know, short-term goals are maybe appropriate. And then the performance committee starts reviewing that and begins to formulate what they think they should be. And then there's another discussion with the GM and executive staff. To me, you know, this is that collaborative process. And then, I'm sorry, it goes down to here. And then the board and the GM agree on the short-term goals, so it goes down to there. And really then the board moves forward with, you know, making sure that gets inputted into this budget process so that the budget then can reflect what those short-term goals are that are set, that are agreed to.
If I may, um, I am just beating a dead horse, I feel, and maybe I am not right for this body or this conversation. I feel like what I'm saying is not landing, but actually, Director Chandler, you brought up a really good point. We have multiple strategic plans already. So, in terms of our bus replacement and our fleet, all of our assets, most of our major assets are on a replacement and asset management schedule. It's part of our transit asset management plan. The last one the board has seen was 2022. We don't have another one due until next year. But that is actually something where that's the communication, the sharing information process. And that was, I'm not trying to be rude, but we have not seen an updated TAMP plan, not just some things that were put in our budget, but an actual plan since 2022. That is the kind of thing that would help me as a director, whether I'm voting on a budget or presiding over something in my committee, because again, we have more than one strategic plan. That's why I kept emphasizing the departmental plans, and these other plans that we have and sharing that information. Thank you.
Yellow stickies, who did those? You guys? Yeah. So we've got down here, PC reviews short-term goals. And then again, over here, short-term goals here is the first public review, I guess. This is the second public. Board should be ready at this point, right? You guys? Board agrees on, what is it, aspirations for major short-term goals?
Yeah.
How is that different than these other things? Is it?
That it's necessarily conflicts with those.
Okay.
Use your microphone.
I don't know that that necessarily conflicts with those. I mean, I think I think Michael was highlighting some of the logistics and timing and which is important for how we do this. What I was sort of saying is that I think that very, very soon from where we are now, ideally, we would already have in mind targets that we would like to see achieved for next year. Maybe they won't end up being the targets. I mean, they almost certainly won't end up being the exact targets that end up being set. But I mean, we should, knowing that we don't know all the constraints and don't know and haven't discussed all the trade-offs that we as a board would have to make, we should ideally we would come into this at around that point, I think, with what we would like to see happen.
Why wouldn't this come over here before you determine metrics?
Sorry,
It says
just
determine metrics for,
Well, because at least this year
for
we
those,
have not
excuse me,
determined
for those of us who are
metrics.
for those of us who are participating online, could you try to explain what this means? Because we can't see the stickies.
I'm not sure.
Not you, Director Larson. I mean for the
Skip
facilitator.
referred to the first yellow sticky, but said this, and
the
it
first
didn't.
yellow says determine metrics.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think the reason I put that there is because I don't
Never
think
mind.
we've done that yet.
Give up.
And so I think we need to do that.
You're talking about for 25.
We actually have done it for 26, but we're talking about 26. We have done it for 25.
Yeah.
We haven't done it for 26.
Right.
And I think we need to do it for 26 or it should have already been done.
Okay, but again, I go back to this one. Board agrees on aspirations for short-term goals.
But by that, I mean specific numbers. So in my mind, the metrics, we would agree on what the actual metrics are. Like, is the metric ridership? Is the metric reliability? Is the metric survey results?
Okay.
What is it? Let's agree on those or have those should be agreed on by that point in
So
time.
this is the number.
Yeah, and then we get to where we are close to right now. And we would, as I believe the staff is starting the process of thinking about the budget for 2026, beginning that process, we should, before they really get too deep into that process, we should be coming to them and saying, hey, this year the board really wants to say, grow by 10% on ridership. So when you do your budget, do it so that it's going to, do what you can to get as close to that number as possible would be kind of the direction that staff would be given. And so they might do that. And the result might be they can get to 10%, but the expenses would be beyond what is possibly affordable. And so they would come back to us and, well, this is what we would need to do. So board, you would need to find, $300 million of incremental tax dollars for us to get there. So can you, so then and that's the process that we're going through over the course of the summer is sort of resetting what getting our aspirations reset to reality, but also discussing amongst ourselves what the trade-offs we have to make as a board. Well, gosh, maybe we could get to 10% growth, but we'd have to cut all the service out to everywhere but Chris Nicholson's district.
Hey, now.
Do we agree on that
I'll
or
vote
not?
for that.
I mean, I'm being facetious, but that's the kind of, we have to make those trade-offs as a board during that process too, I think. That's how I'm envisioning it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this environment, unfortunately, like it's not conducive if we're trying to participate online, particularly if you're hard of hearing, of which I am. So I'm just gonna ask one more thing, and then I think I need to hop off so I don't frustrate anyone else, including myself. But if someone could just do me a favor and put on a sticky note anywhere you think is appropriate for that chart. Two things. Number one, an update of the TAMP. And two, an update on where we are regarding capital projects that we have previously approved. We have a very generous 5-year capital carry forward policy, and that touches all of our committees and everything we do as an agency, and that's also key to communication. So I don't know where that fits on that timeline. I do think that's a key part, though. And that would be from me, but if someone could just maybe.
So Joanne, would that go in the first quarter?
Yes. Yeah, and it should be, but also there's an so we should get as soon as practicable, sorry, we should have an updated TAMP.
Okay.
So we don't have, the last one we had was 2022. And then also in terms of our capital projects, so dollars the board has, authorized in a budget, we should have an update on those at least on a quarterly basis.
Okay.
That would be ongoing. That helps us know where we are because as we pointed out, everything we're doing here is tied to dollars. Thank you.
Who did the blue stickies? Chris and Lynn?
Yeah, that was colorblind, so I wasn't sure which one was blue.
Why?
I'm dead serious. I couldn't tell if it was pink or not.
Why is this so late, Chris?
Well, I think the idea there is, it takes a meaningful amount of time to really come to a strong consensus. And there's also the concern that I think Lynn expressed that if we're doing the finalizing of the short-term goals too early, we'll be setting short-term goals for 2020, 18 months before the end of that point. And so you want to be able to, consider and reconsider, what you're aiming at, closer to when you're actually going to be making that decision. Now, I think, it's a reasonable discussion to have around, where in that timeline and how comfortable you are in a given year. If this were, for example, 1997, there wasn't much happening economically that made changing your short-term goals or rethinking your short-term goals a meaningfully difficult conversation. If it's 2008, your short-term goals in September of 2008 are going to look very different than they would have in even May of 2008 before Lehman crashed. So I think there's a realization there that you may want the ability to, you know, take into account new events and changes and whatever. Michael is gesticulating why, okay, never mind. But that's, I think that was, is that a fair assessment of, okay, yeah.
So just to make
Can I,
clear, when you say agree, this means the board and the GM agree.
Yeah, as far as I understood it, that's basically the end of the that's, we've made our decision, this is what we're doing, you know.
Okay, so that's. Sorry?
can I ask a clarifying
It says
question?
board and GM agree on short-term goals. And we got another one over here, the white sticky says board and GM agree on short-term goals late September, which to me makes more sense because you want to get into this budget process as soon as possible. Yeah. So you want, this would go back over here.
No, sorry, that white one is mine.
No, I know.
Yeah, no, so Lynn, I moved it to keep in the good faith of trying to line it up with the budget. But the note right now is that by September, when we publish the budget per state law, we have to have agreement on these goals. That's the latest we could have agreement on the goals.
Yeah, that's middle of October.
But if we have the agreement closer to June and July when they're starting that budget process, it would make more sense.
Can I just say, like, sometimes we set goals, like historically for our GM CEO that are metrics based, like they're hard numbers, and sometimes they are strategy based. So I think I feel like there's a disconnect. Are we talking about strategic initiatives, or are we talking about more granular, more detailed, what we're gonna measure in terms of goals? Does that make sense? Because I think we should be aligned on key strategic initiatives as early as possible, but then the finer aspects of, you know, how are we going to the KPI process, which doesn't always have to be just a number, you know, that comes a little bit later. I think one follows the other. So I guess I've been pushing maybe to deaf ears, haha, like an objectives and key results, OKR model. And I hear it from committee members a little of both, but I don't see why we can't have objectives and key strategies, you know, sort of figured out at least in a good solid draft earlier on. And then, you know, we agree on what those details look like as we progress. But we're already at 6:11, so that will be my final comment. And maybe that's where some of the disconnect is coming from on my end. Thanks.
Thank you, Joanne, for your comments. Skip, if you're okay with me taking the floor real quick, or further comments?
Okay.
Yeah.
The green sticky, who was that?
That's ours.
Okay. Explain it.
Well, we saw this not as a continuum, but as a circle. So, you know, some of these things need to be done in the year prior to that year. So it's almost as if the January on this side needed to have a December, and because, you know, so we put ours over there for the next year, because it is a continuum. It's not a hard and fast. And I think part of the difficulty I think we're having is everyone's definition of short and long term are different. So perhaps that is why some of these things are all over the map as far as where we would like to place them, because a short term goal that's only 3 months is going to be a different budgetary implication than something that's long term. And so I think that might be part of it, is that we don't have, and not that we need hard and fast definitions, but we should have some idea of what the term short term, what the term midterm, what the term long term means, because it will, I think, especially if it's from the executive staff identifying those, it could be different in the budgetary process because of,
Yeah, I think earlier, Kathleen, but correct me if I'm wrong, but we said long-term could be 3, 5, or 10. Short-term would be the next year, or it could be shorter. It could be a 3 or 6 month.
and if that's and everyone's agreed upon that, I just think that for me, maybe I need to ponder that a little bit more because I agree that short term is probably a year or less. But that, I guess we need to identify that short-term goal and what metrics, as long with what Matt is saying, is different than a goal that's only 3 months long.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
So,
But that is something you're going to have to make a decision when you look at the specifics
right,
of the kind of goal you're talking about.
right.
Okay. Any other comments about this? Okay, well, I'm not going to push it.
So my recommendation for this board, I do hope this was a hearty discussion for everyone. I hope this is an important discussion. I think one of the bigger themes that we're looking at in this, again, as a reminder, this is our main short-term goal as a board is to establish us setting our GM CEOs short-term goals prior to the setting of our budget. Again, the motivation behind that is I heard from the campaign trail, I heard from all of you that we wanted more say as directors when it comes down to the short-term goal setting process for our GMCO. And again, for us, as we have brought up, this is a collaborative process. From the suggestion of Director Banker, which I appreciate it, I think the next steps going forward, and this, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on this or I'm just totally off base. The best steps forward is to take a picture of what we've collaborated here in real person, make this into a graphic for myself, Director Guzman as the Performance Committee Chair to look at, have the conversation with Ms. Johnson and saying, this is what we're looking at, this is what we've heard from this collaborative process today of what specific dates we would be setting forward, not only going into 2026, because in theory, this is our first pilot year of this, but years going forward. And this, in theory, would be the blueprint that we would go with going into 26, going into 27, and forward. During that time, after we have the conversation with Ms. Johnson, Michael, my hope would be we collect feedback from the board and saying, this is where we're at. This is, the written notice of where we've compiled information. And then based on the board feedback, we 100% can adjust. That would be my biggest suggestion going forward. Other big things I kind of think about as well is, I've talked with Michael about this, is going into the process of actually setting the 2026 goals. I think it'd be more than appropriate to send out a form, a survey to all of you as directors to kind of give us a little insight going into the June retreat. Because the June retreat would be, hey, me and Michael and Deborah obviously saw what is the common consensus we are hearing from you as a 15 board body. That's the conversation, that's the debate we would be having on our June retreat. Are there any board directors who are not comfortable with the next steps that I've presented? Okay, I just wanted to kind of land the plane there, Skip, if you're all right with that. So
I just wanted to make 2 comments, and I think we can wrap this up. That's okay. First, I heard important messages, iterative and collaborative. I heard open, transparent communication. I heard focused involvement of the key people. Those are ones that we'd actually talked about earlier, and they're on the agenda. But I heard those things. Chris, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, in terms of next step, I wanted to add one other thing. And that is, we have sub-regional service councils that include stakeholders from all of the major cities on them. One thing that we might consider before we sit down and have the discussion ourselves is sending out a form, an email, whatever, to the members of the sub-regional service councils and say, hey, we're about to set the short-term goals. What do you think they should be? What feedback do you want to give us? Because, we're all accountable. I hear from a bunch of elected officials, but giving them the opportunity to come to us and say, hey, we're doing this, let us know what you think, could be a really nice, easy way to involve them in the process and inform our conversation in June.
Excellent suggestion. I'd be more than open to it. I would just have to see, the feasibility with where our timeline is, but excellent suggestion.
For the very last thing, if I can say that, are you guys ready to finish this up? Margie said to me, you got to go around the room and ask them what they liked about this afternoon's process. And you don't have to say you liked me, but tell me what you liked about this process. So, can I start with you, Deborah?
I will share that I think it's great. Sorry. For those online, I apologize. Deborah Johnson, CEO. I would say this is a great opportunity for everybody to come together and coalesce around what the intent is going forward, so there's no surprises. So that was long. I usually do a one-word close.
Thank you, Deborah. Michael?
I appreciate getting to hear the other directors' points of view on the matter because I've been trying to understand where everybody's at. So this provides some clarity. Still more questions, but some clarity.
I really enjoyed seeing that there was more consensus than disagreement. Gives me faith in the process that we're heading the right direction.
Thanks, Brett. I guess there's a reason we sat together, but I found that there was more in common than in disagreement, and I really appreciated hearing everybody's perspective.
I appreciated seeing this as a continuum and seeing where everyone's definitions fall, so that we can come to that consensus, and seeing where everyone's heart really is, because we all want this agency to move forward. And I think it's exciting to see that we can actually come to an agreement and that we can actually put it on a timeline that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that that we'll be able to make better decisions for spending the time to look at the process.
Yeah, I would say, the first step to having a healthy discussion is establishing a common language. And I feel like there was a real understanding of what are we talking about here and what's this conversation going to look like in June. And so I think that's going to be very helpful when we have that conversation.
I would be redundant, but one of the highlights was Director Guzman channeling the ghost of Doug Tisdale with the triple Cs.
Where's your pipe?
I was excited to see our turnout tonight for all of you guys as directors. I really appreciate you, being here either virtually or, in person. From the session itself, it was very beneficial because during our break, I think that was one of the highlights is I saw everyone engaging and having a conversation. And again, in context, we really only need to see each other once a month. And so for us to actually have the opportunity to discuss and, have that engagement, I was really pleased by.
A journey starts with the first step. So I think we've taken the first step, but we've got a long ways to go.
I was definitely glad to hear everybody's views, and I appreciated how everyone was able to sort of speak briefly and to the point for the most part.
For me, I think that this is really key that we set this up now. And I think once we have all found that consensus, figured out what this looks like for us, that we're really set up for long-term success. Like while this, we may not all be psyched about being here right now, this is good for the long-term success of RTD and this board and everyone who's a part of it now and in the future.
Joanne, are you still there? She left. Chris, the other Chris still there? Okay. Well, I've been disappointed nobody asked me what my button meant. Does anybody know what it stands for? Well, I'll tell you what it stands for this. It means, it says make short-term goals happen. Or if you turn it over, it's how short-term goals work. Actually, there's another version for the S, but I didn't bring that up. Thank you very much for your participation. I appreciate it.
Skip, thank you, Skip. Just wanted to give a round of applause for him. Is there any other discussion at this time? Thank you all for your afternoon. We're adjourned. Oh, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Everyone.